Welcome to another episode of The Artsy Raven, a show about writing and publishing with your host, J.F. Garrard.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of The Artsy Raven. And I'm your host, J.F. Garrard. And today we have the pleasure of speaking to Chris Gorman, the author of Dawn of Magic. So Chris has loved reading, writing, and science since childhood. As an adult, his fascination for fantasy and magic blossomed, and he started exploring magic systems throughout the world, with a special focus on the Celtic magics. In 2001, he began making notes and drafts for his first novel, Dawn of Magic: Rise of the Guardians, in which he explores what he identifies as a trilogy of powers in this world: nature, magic, faith, and science. He has explored ancient sacred sites in England, Cornwall, Wales, and Ireland, participated in pagan rituals in the mountains of both Wales and America, and had several careers, from suits to cars to airplanes. So, Chris, if when you start listening to his voice, it may sound familiar because he is the voice of our introduction to this show. So, thank you for taking the time to speak to us, Chris.
Yeah, no problem. Pleasure to be here, Jeannie.
Now, can we start by telling us a little bit about yourself and why you started writing?
Yeah, for sure. So I've loved the written word since I was a child. My parents taught me to read when I was 3. And as soon as I started asking what words meant, they taught me to use a dictionary. So books have been a big part of my life since I was a very little guy. Uh, we read The Hobbit together when I was in grade 1. And when we finished that, we actually moved right into Lord of the Rings. And my imagination just took off. Um, I've always been writing. It's one of my favorite things. I just always had a stack of scribbles lying around. And as I got older, the scribbles turned into notes and ideas.
Do you remember what you were writing about in the beginning? No?
Not nothing like what I'm writing about now. Mostly like cats and dogs, I think, and why they do
So you
things.
evolved over time.
I have, yeah, yeah. But life gets in the way. So I moved to Toronto when I was 17 for school. Took an electronics engineering technologist program at RCC College of Technology because I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I still don't, to be honest. Well, I want to be a writer, but I know that much.
Writing doesn't pay very much
I
until
am.
you hit the jackpot, anyways. One day, one day.
Yeah, exactly, right? But yeah, I couldn't afford to just go to school. So I worked full time at a tuxedo rental company to pay for rent and food and stuff. And ultimately started my own company when that company closed because I found I loved the stories that came from meeting so many different people. And I actually got a big thrill out of seeing all the different people. Um, so ultimately, since I'm not doing that, that wound up not working out, and life kind of crashed quite spectacularly. And from there, I actually did a little bit of work in the Navy, went out to Quebec and served out there for a bit, and then came back and started manufacturing solar panels. And from there, moved up into a line supervisor position at General Motors, and then wound up at Bombardier here in Toronto, where I still am.
Bombardier is in Mississauga, right?
No,
No?
they're right by Yorkdale, actually.
What? Oh, okay. I never knew that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Okay.
No, they have a big factory right at Downsview Park. It's an
Oh.
airport there. So, yeah, it's a little bit about me and how I got to where I am right now. Um, I've also always had a fairly intense interest in actual magic. Studied a lot on my own, and I've belonged for a while now to a group called the Order of Bards, Ovates, and Druids, which is it's a nature-based spirituality that teaches respect for nature, among other things. But that's primarily, and it does it through using story and lore, which is right up my alley, right? Um, so yeah, you add in that and some partying and a little bit of traveling, and writing kind of took about a 12-year break. I'd come back to it every few years, but it wasn't until about 4 years ago that I looked at my life and said, "Hey, you've had this story burning within you for decades now. What the hell are you doing? Get writing, right?"
Okay, wait a minute. You mentioned this order of bards. So
Yeah.
what do you guys do? You guys go to a pub and then do magic together?
No, no, there's I suppose some do, but no. Pubs for sure.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Um, but no, it's actually it's like a distance learning course, so you get
Oh,
lots
okay.
of things in the mail, and um, but that's what brought me out to England, and I got to explore a bunch of sites in Wales and down into Pennsylvania and some mountain. There's a group down there, so met
So
lots of cool people.
your family from there? Is that
My
that's
family is from here. Um, well, one half of my family is from England, my dad's side, and my mom's side is from Newfoundland, and before that, Ireland. So
okay, cool. So what is your book Dawn of Magic about? And you already told us a little bit what inspired it. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about the book?
sure. So Dawn of Magic is set 100 years in Canada's future, in a world being ravaged by climate change, where our friendly neighbor to the south is eyeing our freshwater supply quite jealously. Um, and to sort of set the scene a little bit, I guess Mother Nature is one of three superpowers, you could say. And she's been fighting an eons long battle against science and faith, who are the other two superpowers. Um, faith being represented by an entity called El, who takes on the various faces of all the Abrahamic versions of God. Um, so when the story starts, Mother Nature has been in a back seat for several thousand years while, religion ran rampant and then science kind of took things over from that. And she's decided that now is the perfect time to overthrow science and faith as the dominant powers and restore the world to balance by reintroducing magic, which in the series is the ability to control and manipulate elements in various ways. So it's the story of three friends who become the world's first wizards in 3,000 years, and they're founding what is going to become an army of wizards that may or may not ultimately save and remake the world.
Oh,
Um, I think you asked about a hidden
yeah,
message.
are there any hidden
Yeah,
messages in the book?
yeah. So it's probably not super hidden, but I'd say it's that we're all human and we're all walking different versions of the same path, and we need to wake up and stop fighting and stop hating each other and start taking care of our planet before we don't have one left.
So is Mother Nature, is she like a god in it? Like she has a physical form or
She does. She makes physical appearances. I say she changes form because she's kind of like she's many different faces to many different cultures that all kind of revere Earth Mother, goddess, um, things like that. So yeah.
now you mentioned about starting and stopping writing. So like so what were some of the things that, you know, really trapped you from, writing your book, right?
Yeah, I'm my own worst enemy for sure. I think a lot of writers are probably, but yeah, I guess for a long time I held on to the idea that if I could finish my book and get it published, I'd be able to quit my day job and travel around the world and just write. Um, which, to be honest, is still my ultimate dream. Um, but I built it up so much in my head that it kind of separated from reality, if that makes any sense. And I wound up trapped in a cycle where I felt I couldn't write because I was always too exhausted from work. And the writing would just be too terrible to ever be published, so I never did it. So I wound up spending over 10 years thinking I was still a writer without ever actually writing anything. Um, and when you have a passion, the longer you ignore it, the more unhappy you get. And the longer it takes for other things to make you happy. And also, the harder it is to go back to that. Because, at least in my case, I felt like I'd been letting myself down for so long. And it was really hard for me to start again. Um, but yeah, when I realized that every time I had picked up the pen over the past several years, it had been to dive back into the world of Dawn of Magic. Because I started it in 2001, and so it's been a long time. Um, I realized that I didn't have to write just so I could quit my day job and travel. I had to write because it's part of my soul. It's part of what makes me me. And when I started again, the words just started flowing out. And even though I was working harder at finishing the book than I'd worked on pretty much anything in my life, I was also the happiest that I'd ever been.
I think sometimes people don't realize the amount when you're world building, it takes a lot of like mental energy and mental
Yeah,
thought to create this world that you can sort of communicate clearly to other people because they can't see what's in your head. So you have to write it out loud, write it out
absolutely.
for them, right? So
Yeah.
so why in particular do you want to write about fantasy?
I write about fantasy to give myself and my readers a break from this world, and to envision and explore a world that's full of potential to be anything and everything that I wish this one was. And with fantasy, you can break certain rules that you can't break in general fiction. Not too many, because I think the best fantasies are still rooted in reality, at least a little bit, but it gives you more freedom. And also, like I talked about a little bit earlier, it's what I grew up reading. And it's been part of some of the happiest memories and moments of my life. So I feel like it's a big part of me.
Cool. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit to talk about publishing. So after you finish your manuscript, a writer typically tries to get it published. So, how did the process of publishing work for you? What kind of methods did you try to publish it?
So I only really tried one traditional publisher, which was Edge Publishing out in Calgary. But the book was quite a bit too long for them, even though it's nowhere near the longest epic fantasy that I've ever read. But I guess they're not like a massive publisher, so they're looking to keep their word count at a smaller amount. And the more I looked, the more disheartened I got, because most of the Canadian publishers didn't want any fantasy books. And American publishers definitely didn't want fantasy books that were set in Canada and revolving around Canadian wizards eventually defeating Americans. So, um, but pretty much everywhere I looked said the manuscript had to be professionally edited before they looked at it anyway, too. So I looked a little bit at self-publishing, but I found I found that was too limiting a little bit, I guess, in audience, without having to do a lot more work than I had time for, like
It's a lot
writing
of work.
and
Yeah.
working. Yeah. Um, so by the time I got to this point, I'd spent probably about $9,000 on editing, because everybody had said this needs to be professionally edited first. And then eventually I sat down and I was like, well, I've spent this much already. I might as well just keep going. And why bother giving it to a traditional publisher anyway, who's just going to take control and probably want me to change a bunch of things that I don't want to change. Um, so I'll keep it. So I signed on with Freeze Press, which is a hybrid publisher, and I think I get the best of both worlds with that. It gives me a similar amount of exposure that a traditional publisher would provide, uh, and I get to keep control and higher royalties. So it's kind of win-win. Cost me more upfront than traditional publishing, uh, probably a little bit more than self-publishing, but I think the payoffs are pretty good. So yeah, I guess overall it's not really the route that I expected to take, but and there's definitely some disadvantages, such as probably the biggest one is being automatically excluded from a lot of potential contests, etc. Finding just ran into a few of that this past week, so it's
Mm.
fresh in my head. Um, but yeah, overall, I'm super happy with how it all worked out.
Yeah, I think over time it might change a bit as more people self-publish. Traditional is just such a hard wall for a lot of people. Like you have to write a lot, I think, before you get
Mhm.
accepted, or if you know somebody, then you can get in more easily, right? So I don't have any friends there
Right.
yet. Maybe one day.
Like everything in life, it's who you know, right?
Yeah, it's true. Let's do networking, right?
Yeah.
So now writers, as we all know, face a lot of rejection. So how do you handle this?
Yeah, probably the same way as most writers at first, I think. I get depressed and mopey and stalk around the house for a while. Uh, you really understand why it is that most famous writers are always depicted as being in bars and alcoholics, maybe. But um, it's very hard to hear that someone isn't interested in something that you've created that's flowed out of your heart and soul, and like it's literally part of you, right? But eventually, I guess I try to reprioritize what I'm hearing or not hearing, because many times they don't give any feedback at all, and remember that they're probably not actually meaning to crush my soul. It's just not their kind of story. And then, I picture some of the people that I see walking through downtown, and remember, not everybody has great taste. So there's plenty of people who do like my writing.
Okay. I'm actually going to go to the question about giving people advice, like for people that can't finish a book, because there's a lot of people that want to finish a book, but then they can't. So, what kind of advice do you have to people that are like this?
um, my advice, because I found it very difficult to finish a book for a very long time, is don't get lost in edits. It doesn't have to be perfect the first time, and I find it's more important, much more important, to get the story out of you and onto the page. Keep a notebook close by that you can jot some notes on with page numbers of what you want to change if you do think of something, or comments, or I do a lot of highlighting in mine. But don't interrupt the magic of the words flowing by trying to force them into making sense. Get them out.
And
Yeah,
okay.
get them
And
out and
continuing
then
on that
put them
question,
into the perfect
sorry.
format later.
Okay, like, so can you tell us a little bit of what you've tried to do that works and doesn't work when you write? What sort of writing tips do you have?
Well, the one that I'm using right now, which is probably it's worked the best for me, is I have a stack of cue cards. I'll show you here.
An old school
Old
paper
school
there.
paper, yeah, right. But I organized them, so I came up with like a
Okay.
little color coded,
Oh, color codes.
yeah,
That's fancy.
right. And
Wow.
then I put a little dot on top of each one, so I knew which color.
Hmm.
It was that happened because I dropped the stack, but um, and had to figure out what order they all went in again. And some of them have text and little notes, and some have little sketches and stuff as I think of it, right? Um, so for me, the best thing is to come up with a rough outline of plots and characters, but leave a lot of room for growth, because you can spend months plotting and planning every single detail, and sometimes that's all you do. right? And then you move on to another idea, and that whole thing is gone. But once you start writing, the characters are going to come alive and they're going to do things that surprise you. And occasionally they're going to change the plot all on their own. And before you know it, your months of planning are all down the toilet. So I think with a general idea of where you want to go, then you just let the characters take you there. So
Cool.
yeah. And then what I did with the cue cards is I make notes as I go, right? So I don't spend months jotting the notes down. I kind of do a rough idea of what I think each thing is going to be, and then I start writing, and I use these to continue my notes.
Okay, so we're gonna wrap up here. So now where can we find your book and you?
Mhm. So my website is christophergorman.com. Can also be found on social media, Facebook at Christopher Gorman Author, Instagram Gorman Chris 83, and Twitter Gorman Chris.
Okay,
And you
cool.
can buy the book through Amazon, Friesen Press, or Canadian Authors Association's catalog.
Awesome. So I believe you're going to give us a little treat here. You're going to give us a 10-minute reading of your book and just tell us a little bit what it's about and then sort of dive into it, if you will.
Sure. So I'm going to read the introduction to the second chapter. In this chapter, Aiden, the main character in the novel, has been having a series of nightmares for the past several years and is getting quite worried because more and more of these nightmares are starting to spill over into real life. He's basically he's manifesting as a wizard, but right now he's still just experiencing nightmares. So in this scene, we experience one of these. I'm running fast. My life depends on it. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know what I'm running from. It's dark. So dark I can't see more than half a meter in front of me. I have no hope of avoiding the many branches and leaves reaching out to strike at me as I run. They cover my face and arms in tiny, painful cuts, while gnarled tree roots grab at my ankles. Tree roots? I must be in a forest. But how did I get here? And why am I running? There's a knot of fear deep in the pit of my stomach. I feel like a deer pursued by relentless wolves, all of my senses on full alert. The sky lights up. A blinding blue-white light morphs the dark shadows of the forest into hideous monsters reaching out for me. Seconds later, thunder crashes through the forest, so loud it almost deafens me. The sky lights up again, and again. 3 lightning strikes in quick succession. 3 blasts of thunder so close together they become one cascading explosion. And then a deep, oppressive silence fills the forest. Only my ragged gasps for air and the sound of my footsteps crunching the twigs on the forest floor pierce the cloud of silence. A wind picks up out of nowhere. Branches rattle against each other, sounding almost alive. The wind grows stronger, colder. I hear hooves pounding the ground behind me, and I glance over my shoulder to see a massive set of antlers through the trees, gaining rapidly. Lightning blazes through the sky again, and the dark antlers become a giant stag, with eyes full of knowing and intent. I run faster, trying desperately not to stumble as the cold turns to an icy chill. Aiden. My name flows with the wind, ghostly, and no more than a faint masculine whisper. It wraps itself around me. Something deep inside me responds to the whisper, awakening, calling to the wind, beckoning it. I smother that part of me that seeks to welcome this darkness, embracing instead the terror. Aiden, a new voice calls, feminine and commanding, cold and icy. It's so powerful that tentacles of fear sink into my heart. The pounding hooves stop, and I glance behind me instinctively. There's nothing there but blackness. Aiden. Another voice, full of ancient feminine power unrestrained, cuts through all of my walls and barriers and reduces me to utter panic. Lightning lights up the forest again. Massive primordial vines stretch out all around me, reaching for me. Come to me. The voice has changed subtly, sounding almost welcoming. The fingers of fear tighten. Beads of cold sweat run down my face. The welcoming quality of darkness spurs me to run faster, my muscles straining. Lightning flashes again. Thunder crashes. I'm out of the forest, but I don't stop running. Behind me, the vines twist and stretch their tentacle like fingers toward me. Lightning illuminates the sky again, and my heart sinks. I've reached a cliff. The edge isn't even 10 feet away. I spin around to face the churning mass of vines as fear courses through my body. Now that I've stopped, the vines slow. There's a sinister quality to them. I back slowly toward the edge. The tangled mass of vines opens, revealing a green tinged darkness. It's as if I can feel the heart of the forest itself within the vines, beating strong and welcoming. The shadow of a woman emerges from the darkness, ancient and terrifying. As it moves toward me, the age of centuries seems to fall away from her. Come to me. Her voice echoes from the heart of the forest. My heels reach the edge. The vines loom ever larger. Embrace my power as it flows through you. I feel myself contract, folding in on myself as something deep inside my being reacts to the voice. As I edge backward, I get dizzy at the thought of falling off the cliff. Aiden. This is a new voice. Not exactly sweet, but the sound of 100 voices in one. It sounds like the forest itself, as though the trees of the forest and the soil between my toes were somehow beckoning me to join them. It comes from over the cliff. I look behind me. Somehow, Toronto lies right below me. The lights of the city illuminate the night sky, bathing it in an unnatural daylight. Even at this hour, countless vehicles snake through the core. The thick, pervasive smell of exhaust assaults my senses, contrasting harshly with the rich smell of life and decay in the forest. Above it all, the CN Tower gleams like a jewel, the heart of the city. The densely populated bloom of lights that is the Downsview Refugee Park thrums in the distance, while rough, dry vegetation swallows up the abandoned industrial and commercial districts on the city's outskirts. Mist rides in and shrouds the city in its depths. Air rushes past, and an intense vertigo fills me. When it stops, I look out over the cliff again. There's nothing there but air. Aiden, comes the sweet voice. Be strong. Don't give in to fear. Trust. Believe in yourself. Step over the edge and come alive. It makes no sense. None of this makes any sense. I know nothing but death awaits if I step over the edge, but the dark mass of vines fills the entire cliffside now, and there is such an intense power emanating from it that any attempt at resisting it will likely mean death too. Believe, Aiden. Believe in yourself and believe in the world. A black tendril detaches itself from the vines and stretches toward me. Closer, closer. And then the whole world begins to shake. And that's it.
Ooh, thank you very much, Chris, for being on the Artsy Raven show. And Chris can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And you can buy Dawn of Magic, Rise of the Guardians through Amazon, Friesen Press, or the Canadian Authors Association catalog. And thank you very much once again, Chris, for being on our show.
Thanks for having
Um,
me.
yeah, it's been lots of fun. So, just letting everyone know, the RC Raven is produced by JF Garrard. The voice in the show's introduction is Chris Gorman, and the music is by Tim Moore. And for more episodes of the RC Raven about Artsy Raven about writing and publishing, visit our website jfgarrard.com/AR podcast or find us on Spotify. And if you enjoyed the show, you can show your appreciation by buying us some digital coffee so we can pay our accountant. So thank you for tuning in and stay safe, everybody. Bye.